so often feel like it's like a child coming out. It's like, it's not supposed to be like this. Like we have this knowing, like this is not how it's supposed to be.
Hi, this episode will be in English. But first, there will be a German introduction. Because it is our intro that I say Hallo und herzlich willkommen zu der ersten Sendung von der Empathiestadt Zürich. Mein Name ist Michelle Reichelt und ich bin der Host von dieser Sendung. And on the other hand, I want to tell you some big news I am super excited about, and it makes more sense to say it in German. So, if you don't speak Swiss German, you can either skip this part and jump directly to the input from Tanja about nonviolent communication with a systemic lens, or just continue listening to our super hard to learn language. Meine Neuigkeit, die ich euch erzählen will, ist, dass ich meinen allerersten Grundlagenkurs in Empathie und Konfliktlösung gebe. Und zwar auf Zoom. Das heisst, ihr könnt alle von daheim aus auf dem Sofa dabei sein. So ein bisschen wie bei der Sendung, aber einfach noch mit Bild und live. Und wer hat Lust, am ersten Abend, am 25. Oktober, unverbindlich reinschnuppern bei mir auf Zoom? Ihr könnt euch dann auch später entscheiden, ob ihr für die restlichen 6 Abende auch noch dabei bleiben oder ob es einfach beim ersten Abend bleiben lassen. Ihr könnt mir einfach schreiben, hallo, ich will an den ersten Kursabig kommen, und dann gibt es von mir den Zoom-Link für den ersten Kursabig per Mail. Schickt mir ein Mail auf michelle@empathiestadt.ch. Ich freue mich auf euch. And now we switch back to English and jump directly into the 8th episode. You might also have noticed that I had an archive-heavy time. I found not only the recordings of Flavia and Sonia and photos of me as a baby, see on Instagram, but also the recordings of the Embodying and Teaching Year course that took place about a year ago in Langwies. In this episode, Tanja Walliser, co-founder of Empathy City Zurich and the Empathy Initiative, talks about the systemic aspect of nonviolent communication. A few acronyms that are useful to know. When Tanja talks about NVC, she means nonviolent communication, according to Marshall B. Rosenberg. And when she talks about NGL, it stands for Nonviolent Global Liberation, brought to life, among others, by Miki Kashtan, who is a great inspiration to us all. You can find more information about Miki Kashtan and Marshall Rosenberg and others in the description.
Why am I passionate about emphasizing a systemic lens in NVC? And I say emphasize because it's not about bringing a systemic lens to NVC, because it already has inherently a systemic lens. And Marshall Rosenberg was talking a lot about social change as well. And yeah, I am really obsessed with the question, how can we really change the world? There are many things that I don't like about it the way it is now. Like, how can we really contribute to create a planet that is beautiful for all beings? I have been obsessed with that since I was maybe 14 years old, and I was an activist. I was doing a lot of things. I was a politician, I was working for a labor union, I was in different movements and organizations, and one day I completely stopped with everything. This was about 7 years ago, and at that time, and also for the people who have heard this story like a million times in here, it has a twist. You will hear something new. Don't worry. I promise you're not going to be bored. I was working for this labor union, and I remember exactly this day. It was a time we were on a lot of strikes, and I was walking down this huge shopping street in Zurich, and I was supposed to go into a store to talk to the retail workers, and I just froze. And I was like, I can't. And then my boss took me to the psychological emergency in Zurich. Yeah, by that point I was so burnt out. Yeah, I left the labor union very tired, very disillusioned, and very angry. And since then I was trying to figure out what the fuck happened. I realized a few things. I realized mainly that I was really tired from fighting. I was really tired of betraying my body by working 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. I was really trying of pushing my team to do the same thing, which is a thing that I'm really ashamed about today. And I was tired of fighting in my own organization what I thought we were trying to bring to the world. Like fighting sexual harassment in my own organization where I was working. So for quite a while, I completely dropped out of everything. And I discovered NVC. And in all the radical things that I read in my life and in all the illegal things I did, I realized that actually NVC, for me, it was the most radical thing I ever came across. Marshall called it the domination culture. And an image that really helps me to like be clear about what that means, I see it as like a highway, like a paved street, like the culture that I imagine most of us grew up in, and the culture that is dominating. It is a system that it offers us one clear way. Yeah, Miki Kashtan would call this patriarchy, by the way, as in not just about like the oppression of certain genders, but like as to describe the domination culture. Yeah, we learned that there is a way to live life and to organize things that are normal and desirable. And we learn what is good and bad. We learn what does it mean to be successful. We learn what progress is. We learn what and who has value and what and who doesn't have value. We learn which, for example, sexual orientation and gender identity is normal, how we relate to nature. Like we learn this is how it should be. This is how your relationships, our economy, our politics should be working. Maybe for some of you, someone who also really inspires me is Charles Eisenstein. He will probably call this like the old story. And for those of you who are also like Marxist interested, like I used to read a lot about that, this is probably what Gramsci would call the cultural hegemony. Yeah, and if we follow the rules, we are promised that we can climb the ladder and live a good life and that we belong. And the way to keep things on the street is by control. And if people start to like move at the margins, we try to avoid it by rewarding them if they stay here and by punishing them if they move away. And so if we differ from this path, we can be subject to discrimination, fear of belonging, and even violence. I also want to say that many of us choose to do a lot of things that fit perfectly into the street, and I'm not condemning that at all. But the thing is that most of us don't really get a choice. We are not told you can be anything and you can do anything you want and you will be loved and you will belong. So we are told all these stories about human nature and we internalize them. There is this flow between individuals and the structures and the system and the culture that we internalize it and we reproduce it in the way we relate to ourselves, in the way we relate to others, in the way we relate to the modern human world, in the way we think and speak. And this is where NVC comes in. For me, this is also really like creating like islands, like mini versions of the more beautiful world that is possible, like Charles Eisenstein would say. The more beautiful world our hearts know is possible. I remember exactly when I felt this for the first time. And I'm forever grateful for these people who held the space. And I tell them like I don't see them anymore, but I tell them every year, I'm so grateful you created this space. Like I will never stop trying to create this for other people. I will never stop like wanting to experience this myself. And also realizing this is not what my activist spaces felt like at all. And it is something that I want everyone to experience. Yeah, and as little as people in activism spoke about NVC, as little I heard people in NVC speak about social change. And I mourn it. And I found a quote from Marshall Rosenberg. And he said, I would like us to create peace at 3 levels and have each of us to know how to do it. Within ourselves, between people, and in our social systems. To look out at the structures that we've created and to look at whether they support peaceful connections between us, and if not, to transform these structures. And I mourn that NVC tends to be presented and used only for personal transformation and to improve relationships. And I don't want to condemn that at all. Miki Kashtan says we need to do both. Like, we need to do individual transformation and change systems, because the individual is not enough. And this is also within NGL, that like the worry is that it's not going to be enough to create change if we just focus on ourselves. How I see it, I don't know. I really don't know what is needed. I can just follow my passion and what like ignites a fire in myself, and trust that if I do that, it serves. And I know that for some people, taking care of their own healing is all that is within their capacity. And I trust so much that it serves. Yeah, and yet I'm so super passionate about bringing these two things together. Yeah, I really have this dream that we can uproot much of this with individual transformation and heal and transform the systems and structures that create a lot of the oppression that we feel, the pain that we feel. And what my dream is that we take this transformative power that we create in our NVC islands and we use it to put some cracks into the street for those of us who have the capacity to do that. Yeah, so how to do that for me is on the one side, what I do is I bring NVC to activist spaces, and I love it. Another way how to do is what I do now. I want to emphasize the systemic lens in NVC circles. Yeah, that the way how we embody and teach NVC brings our individual experience also back to knowing that they happen in a certain context of these stories and the structures that we live in. A situation that recently really bothered me was when I was eating with my son. It's usually a very stressful time because he comes from kindergarten and then he leaves again, and he was like, I'm not eating this. So this would be the observation. My son said, I'm not eating this. And I was feeling very frustrated and angry. And when I think about my needs, I really think I needed some recognition, because I try to really cook what he likes. So I was like, oh, I really need some recognition or appreciation. Yeah. So this is how I learned to go through the steps, and it's super helpful. And I want to now add one question. And the question is, how is this situation shaped by the system or the structures I live in? Or there are some questions we can ask ourselves. What stories or narratives about human nature that we tell ourselves are at play at this situation? So if I go back to the situation with my son, the observation is still the same. And I ask myself this question also. I notice that different thoughts come up for me. Like when I ask my situation, how is this situation shaped by the structures I live in? The first thought that came to me was, I'm not supposed to be alone with this. Like a whole other set of thoughts kind of suddenly came up for me. Yeah, like this is not a sustainable structure, the two of us. Like we talk a lot about that in NVC as well. That's why we do mediation. It's a very fragile structure to people. And I think that's a tragedy that happens a lot within families. It's a very fragile structure. You have like these relationship, often you have a romantic relationship, it's fragile. And then what was interesting for me is when my head also goes there, also other feelings came up as well. I felt lonely. And I'm a bit worried that it can be heard as like, this is the right way to think about it. Like it's both is happening in me. I feel frustrated and angry. And then I ask myself this question, and then I also feel lonely. And also I connect to other needs because suddenly I realize I really need community. Yeah, and there's also more, like we can go really into depth. Of course, there's also things about the stories that I tell myself, how I need to be a good mother and what that means, and that I always have to be patient, or that I shouldn't spoil him with cooking the food he likes and do like extra. There's much more, of course. And also, maybe I just realized now, there's also a story around separation between him and me. Like I'm responsible for the situation. And he's almost 6 years old. And actually, I realize more and more that it really works to collaborate with him and create situations together. And that it's also within these stories to think like I'm the grown up and now I have to decide what we're doing. If we talk about social change, it really addresses this topic of overwhelm. And like for me, it's so helpful to go into this circle of like, I feel my pain. I connect it to my needs, to my vision. And then I take a small step. And then I celebrate it. And then again, I feel more resilient to be with my pain. This is very much inspired by Joanna Macy, this model that I teach. And it really addresses this, like, how can I be with my overwhelm? Yeah, to go to gratitude and celebration.
And this was it from Tanja Walliser, co-founder of the project Empathiestadt Zurich. And to end this episode, I offer you a poem, The Radical Gratitude Spell by Adrienne Maree Brown, read by Tanja.
You are a miracle walking. I greet you with wonder. In a world which seeks to own your joy and your imagination, you have chosen to be free. Every day, as a practice. I can never know the struggles you went through to get here. But I know you have swum upstream, and at times it has been lonely. I want you to know I honor the choices you made in solitude. And I honor the work you have done to belong. I honor your commitment to that which is larger than yourself. And your journey to love the particular container of life that is you. You are enough. Your work is enough. You are needed. Your work is sacred. You are here. And I am grateful.
I hope you enjoyed listening to Tanja as much as I did. If you are a regular listener of the Sendung, maybe send this one to your English-speaking friends. And if you do speak Swiss German, schreib mir einen Kommentar oder schick mir ein Mail auf michelle@empathiestadt.ch und sag, hallo, ich will einen ersten Kursabig kommen. Dann schicke ich dir den Zoom-Link zum Schnuppern am 25. Oktober am 6. Ich freue mich, dich kennenlernen. Ergänzend zu der heutigen Folge gibt es auch noch einen Text, den wir mit unserem Newsletter zusammen verschicken. Wenn du den gerne möchtest bekommen, dann schick mir doch auch ein Mail und schreib einfach, hey, ich würde gerne den Newsletter zu der echten Sendung bekommen. Dann schicke ich dir den.